day, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in this great continent of America, and I would love to say off continent if that's a thing. Could probably check the stats to see how many people fit into that category. Here we are, yet another month. Time is going by quickly, which is seemingly only speeding up as time goes on. I can't believe we're already into the fourth theme for the month. I think that's correct, four. And this is almost an about face from last month, which is going to be an about face from next month in terms of the topics not really connecting, doesn't make any of them more or less important. But today we're diving into something that's going to be close to almost everyone's heart who watches this because it has to do with children. And I don't know how fitting I am to talk about this because my children walk around on all four legs and their probiotics are basically the cat crap they find in fields. And that's on me for not teaching them to walk as a father. I'm joking. I have fur children and their gut health is just important to me as any other being's gut health because dog farts are a thing, especially when they're lying in bed with you. So this month we are talking pediatrics and probiotics, which is the nice, double consonant title, but we're really looking at the story of the impact of the early years, the formative years of development for a child, and how more than ever research is showing that does set the tone to what the propensity doesn't mean it's written in stone by any way, shape, or form, but what the propensity for certain patterns of early childhood experience physiologically set the tone for in that child's adult life, i.e., how a child's born, early year development in terms of feeding structures, introductions of foods, and the likelihood of the influence of the microbiome, its development, and what that may mean as a likelihood to the chronic degenerative disease connection much later in life. Those research correlations are getting stronger than ever. So without further ado, as per usual, I'm going to share my screen and we are going to start the slideshow from the beginning. So I want to thank everyone for being here. As per usual, if you are wanting to see this in the future, it will be on our YouTube channel shortly thereafter. It's premiere airing, which is right now, and there is a lot of great content on our channel. And I will say that we have diversified our content in the sense that we are doing a podcast now called the Following Your Gut podcast. So if you're not aware of that, definitely check us out, like, subscribe, everything that you guys do to support us. We greatly appreciate, and it helps us continue to put out good content, to continue to try to be one of the leaders in the education space on behalf of Master Supplements and US Enzymes. So today I want to start with one of my favorite things, an exercise in perspective. I'm of the belief, this is not a scientific fact, this is not an elucidated truth, but it is my personal belief that Mother Nature does not make any mistakes. If you look at how everything on this planet is so perfectly and intricately designed to support the existence of everything else that connects into it, I believe you'll understand that she is very thorough in how she does things. And medicine nowadays has become, well, it's shifting now, but it has become something until I think a lot of people have woken up to the fact, myopic and segmented. What I mean by that is the way we treat health is in many ways looking at the body as a physical meat suit that doesn't have a connection or a tie-in to the patterns of nature, that doesn't have infinite wisdom and intelligence all its own. And because we're not using systems thinking in interconnected ways when it comes to addressing the body in classical Western medicine, and my hope is in my lifetime that changes, we very easily forget to see the forest through the trees where we're looking at lab tests, and those are important, but people are so much more than lab reference ranges on a PDF document. And the infinite wisdom of the body and how it presents itself, and knowing how the body works as an interconnected structure, I don't think is ever more important than when considering the early development phase of childhood and the time frame before childhood, the conception, gestation, and womb in utero development of that child. So we have to understand that there is a biological code. I want you to think about this. In 0 to 2 weeks, we are a bunch of undifferentiated cells. But by week 3 to 8, we have the first phase of our forebrain, midbrain, and hindbrain with the reflective digestive structures already developed to let you know how important the early organs of development are for the critical features and abilities of the fetus in and of itself. And at 9 weeks, we are a fully formed small human, uh, growing and working on becoming appropriately sized to be birthed inside of mom. The nature of how incredible that is, where there's something that I think everyone should become aware of called the zinc flash. It's when the sperm meets the egg, and that release of energy is a transfer of not only energy but information in terms of genetics into this small little ovum, and that becomes a human. So the design of this really is perfect, and everything is designed to work together if you look at how things are structured. Based upon that structure, it determines the function, and this whole organism that we are is entirely interdependent on those aspects of function to be optimized if we want to live a long, healthy, and disease-free life. So this is really about a story, and then it fits into the considerations of if that story moves away from optimal, and we're going to define optimal here as nature's intended design, and it's going to be focusing on these five things, right? The process of conception. And I think the single most important thing at the point of conception for the future health of the baby is the health of mom and dad on a physical level and beyond. Then there's the aspects of development. How does that go in the womb based upon the experience that mom is having in her life, the overall health status, and the things that she's working on and dealing with, which ultimately influences how the baby develops and how the pregnancy goes for that woman. The birthing process is very important because nature had an intended way of making that happen, which is a story I do want to tell. And then there's phase two development, which includes early life influence moving all the way to adult life. The first 3 years of a child's life is by far the most critical for setting the tone of developing who that child is going to be biochemically speaking. It's when all the body systems find a way to work together. It's when the immune system is most educated. It's when the digestive system develops. It's where the gut brain axis forms and allows that child to express its ultimate form of personality. And it becomes one of the many interconnected beings that walk this world, hopefully trying to live a long and healthy life, contributing to the wonderful nature of what this planet has to offer. So we got to start with Act One. We're going to fast forward through the conception process because I'm sure all of you here know how that's done. It's quite fun from what I hear. And then we're going to go right to the process of the actual birth. Before we had modern medicine, there was an incredible detriment to humanity. Before C-sections were not were a thing, a lot of babies didn't come into this reality. A lot of women unfortunately died giving childbirth, and the C-section is an incredible marvel of the developments of medicine and human capability because under certain conditions, when it is not possible to deliver a natural birth, a C-section is all there is. And unfortunately, although it is not optimal, it is something that has to be done for the benefit of the wife, or the mother rather, and the child. A natural delivery is really what it's all about, and the process of natural delivery is such a beautifully and intricate designed thing. I really want to hit home on some of the things that we may gloss over or take for granted in terms of how they influence the development of the baby and how that process and its interconnected nature is so intelligently designed. Mom gives us our first microbiome. So, as we come through the birth canal, infants are exposed to the very first inoculation of, I'll call them concentrated human microbes. It was thought that the placenta and the amniotic sac was entirely sterile, but from what I've heard, things that I've read in the past and things I've heard other people say, that notion is starting to be challenged. But for all intents and purposes, the entry point into the birth canal through the canal is when the baby gets the most massive hit of microbes, that is the starter kit of microbiome seeding, so to speak. The colonization of an infant is quite interesting because it is mode and delivery dependent as well as diet dependent. So the whole idea is as the baby comes through the birth canal, whatever the dominant microbes that are inoculating the mom are what the baby first gets. And then the ideal process to how that develops is as a result of the child's inoculation, the seeding of the major orifices of the body, so through the mouth, through the nasal canal, through the eyes, through the ears, and the skin, because everything on our body that's an opening or everything on our body that's a covering or a lining technically has its own microbiome. So when you are vaginally born, you get the best chance for following the pattern as it's designed. What that means is that the bacteria residing within the canal, which typically are lactobacillus and Prevotella dominant, those are what the baby is going to be most exposed to. It swallows, and then the introduction of food coming from mom is designed to nurture the growth of those keystone strains that ultimately should be the largest inhabitants or some of the largest inhabitants of the GI system. Babies born via C-section, unfortunately, do not have the same opportunity because A, they never get the proper delivery via the vaginal path. And secondly, most hospitals for a long period of time were really focused on sterility and safety. So not only was the baby, how we say, early sterilized, but it was also introduced to bacteria via the species of skin bacteria from who handled the baby. And in some cases, that wasn't mom first, it might have been someone else. So, right there, you see the first step in the process if someone is born C section is suboptimal. And it's the development path from that C section birth that ultimately can dictate the things that child may develop as a suboptimal compromise. And the research around this is very important, and it's also very well robust. There is a major difference, as I mentioned, in how the baby's exposure to microbes, thus how it develops a relationship with its microbiome and what that means for the child as a young infant all the way into adult life, because our microbiome is one of the most important relationships that we have. And although it is somewhat set initially, and it's developed to something like a unique thumbprint, like everyone's is different, it is in dynamic flux with us for our entirety based upon the things that we subject it to. And it's really interesting where the fecal microbiota of infants born vaginally resembles the maternal fecal microbiome by day 3, and by day 7, which is not something observed in C-section delivery. So what this means is two things. First and foremost, it's very important for mothers to consider the GI health because every mother wants to give their kid the best start. Number two, if for some reason someone is the mother of a C-section born baby, then the considerations for what you might have to do for that child as far as lifestyle, diet, and environmental decisions and how they go are more impactful because it's more important to focus on the development in the back end post birth and post delivery. So it's interesting to know the patterns, and this is where, how's the best way to put this? Stool testing and various aspects of patterns are about as close as we can get because we have to remember that every individual person is going to have their own unique microbiome. So the long and short of what a lot of these studies, these research graphics, these teaching tools show us is that there are optimal patterns. And we have to understand what those optimal patterns do from a perspective of what they connect to. What I mean by that is if we have the bacteria in optimal profiles in the green, then the likelihood is we know that the bacteria that are going to seed the microbiome are going to influence the microbiome development in a positive way. Because bacteria are the main educators of early immune system development, because most of the immune cells in the human body reside within the digestive system. And the digestive system of an infant is vastly different than that of a 3-year-old or an adult because not only is it forming and it's educating, learning, and developing at a rapid pace, it's also not as robustly built. It is likely more leaky. It is more susceptible to the influence of pathogens and potential inflammatory insults. And those early insults very much leave a mark on the immune system and thus can predispose the child to having a highly sensitive immune system, a highly reactive immune system. And if that process develops on an ongoing basis, that's where these conditions, these symptoms, and also ultimately some of these long-term diseases that may hit someone, in their fifth or sixth decade of life, believe it or not, those patterns can be seeded at the early age of a day to 5 days old. So we have to understand that the beneficial bacteria in the vagina allow things to be more antibiotic resistant. They're more resemblance of the profile that is more in line with our genetics because the genes and the microbes are always cross-talking to each other via epigenetic expression. And it's very interesting that the only time in human history where you want lesser diversity in terms of the profile of the microbiome is actually during the early days of being an infant. An infant's microbiome is less diverse by design because the optimal path of development is created that way, whereas a baby born C-section or a baby formula fed rather than breastfed develops an adult-like microbiome diversity at too young an age, and that can also agitate the immune system because it's too early to have so many residents living within our GI system, so to speak. So the context of vertical transmission, which is the beneficial microbes that come from the mom that go to the infant, basically rely primarily on the mode of delivery, but also via the feeding process, the physical process of interaction with baby on mom, so, skin time post-birth, and also our skin being the largest organ in our body has a very diverse microbiome itself. So regular feeding of breast milk continues to develop the oral microbiome, which is part of the GI system. But as the baby swallows, it's intaking microbes with the food that is there and meant to build the microbes in terms of diversity and populations. So it is, well documented, and here's the big takeaway pattern. Breastfed infants have more protective bacteria that make them more pathogen resistant, virus resistant, and ultimately infection resistant. And formula-fed infants, unfortunately, have a higher pro-inflammatory class of certain species like proteobacteria, based upon the fact that the bacteria can only develop based upon the initial seeding and the food that's given to that child, ultimately to feed not only the baby, but the bacteria as well. And this is something that I mentioned before. So they've done specific studies that use metagenomic sequencing, and the complexity of an infant's gut is supposed to increase slowly over time, and only resemble an adult-like pattern typically by the age of 2 or 3. The finalized profile of gut microbiomes in terms of diversity and quantity usually comes on at the age of 3, but formula-fed babies have a more adult-like prominent pattern earlier in life. So as I said before, not only is this one of the only times where more diversity is less optimal for a human, but secondarily, it's the inverse problem, so to speak, of the path of development. Too many microbes can actually destabilize the gut and then the immune system, and thus predisposing a child to having a higher propensity to develop symptoms and issues at a younger age. And the major reason for that is the one thing in breast milk that is not as prevalent, not prevalent at all unless it is synthesized in a lab and put into a formula, are these special human milk oligosaccharides. And these are special fibers designed to build the healthiest diversity and profile of bacteria that give that kid a fighting chance to develop the most complex system in the body, that is the immune system. And the reason why children and infants are supposed to have a lower density and diversity of microbes is because you want the microbes in higher concentrations that have the genes and the ability to break down these milk oligosaccharides to anchor the specific strains like lactobacillus and bifido, because those are much harder strains to grow. And like I mentioned before, Mother Nature doesn't make a mistake. It's all complete in the design. But we have to understand that if we shift one variable, and of course, the delivery mode is the most prominent and massive variable, we shift all things. If we shift smaller variables like the quantity of breastfeeding versus formula, the introduction of early foods, that one variable still shifts all things because, as I mentioned, the body is an interconnected and networked organism, and everything will shift based upon the influence and the inputs that that body is experiencing. So there really is a beautiful pattern here. From the point of pregnancy, the most important considerations are the well-being of mom. What kind of food is she eating, i.e., what kind of immune tolerance and immunoglobulins and nutritional profile is she going to transfer to not only herself, because she has to grow a baby, but to the baby as well, so the baby has some degree of adaptive immune tolerances built in. Does the mom use, or has she used multiple courses of antibiotics, or does she do so during pregnancy? Because Nothing will fragment the body from its own self-communication like antibiotics, notwithstanding scenarios where obviously you need them for the well-being of yourself. Host genetics, infections, and maternal stresses, fundamentally everything that the mom experiences, the baby experiences to some way. Then we go to the mode of delivery, and obviously we talked about that, the mode, the vertical transfer of microbiota, and the other thing that mom gives to the baby, or mitochondria. So the two most important influences that shape our physiology come from mom, which ultimately then gives you a child with an infant micro profile, and ultimately now the same variables that influenced mom will influence the baby and then some. Mode of feeding, maternal diet, is the mom eating well or is she eating sub-quality food? Host genetics, family lifestyle, geographic location, and environment all play massive roles in the very aggressive short window of development from the infant up to the age of about 3. And when someone is unfortunately having to give a C-section, we're not talking about scheduled C-sections, those are not optimal in any way, shape, or form. But for the benefit of the mom, the safety of the mom, and to ensure the baby's going to be delivered, although it is a compromise, there are strategies that can be employed. Something that has been recently introduced, and I say recently, I don't know when the first idea to do so was, but something that people are doing are vaginal swabs. So if the baby has to be essentially cut out of the womb, what they're still able to do is swab the vaginal region and make sure that they swab the child's face entirely, some of the skin as well, because that is the second best way to ensure that the inoculation intention coming from mom is still going to be delivered to the baby, albeit at a less concentrated dose. It's much better than the alternative of the random skin microbiome of whoever's holding the baby first, because the gut microbes and the skin microbes typically look nothing alike. And we have to understand this process has a lot of gas pedal and a lot of brake pedal. What I mean by that is how the variables come together. If we allow the variables to reflect the patterns of nature, we do the best job we possibly can. If we have a multiple series or a multitude of series of compromises, what that ends up doing is it fragments the efficiency and the coherence of that process. And anything that does so creates a compromise for the child and the mother in some way, shape, or form. So we always want to think about anything that builds coherence. And really, to me, coherence is self-identity in the body knowing it's an interconnected organism and functioning efficiently in that way is going to result in the healthiest possible child. Things that fragment and segregate that connection go against the intended design, and that's when we see the compromises materialize as potentially unhealthy children. So now that we've covered the birthing process, the next most important thing is, well, what is the baby eating? I did mention before that the adult gut and the infant gut are very different things. The GI system goes through its own, I guess, puberty-like expression from a birth up until a toddler's age, where the immune system is being critically influenced by the developing microbes and the food coming in, both from maternal feeding and obviously food choices. And as a result, the bacterial colonization, the specific profile, the exposure to things that are also going to challenge that immune system and help to develop that gut are going to make the gut and the immune system a more resilient unit in order to be able to defend against things that would otherwise stress the child and symptoms would present. So it's really important to understand that these early days are really about the immune system learning what it is it has to do. We're typically born with a strong innate immune system, and that still grows and evolves. But as we get the influence and exposure from the factors in the milk, the environment that the child is in, the adaptive immune system has the ability to really grow and shape itself into something that is able to pick up the other side of the axis and support the innate immune system. So the immunity through the gut is really how it develops to systemically take care of the things that potentially could come in, cause all kinds of havoc on us. Those are typically bacteria, viruses, fungi, parasites, foreign cells. We've said this in many of our presentations. The digestive system is the last line of defense of the outside of the body. So even though it's in the body cavity, it is not the circulatory system, but the circulatory system exists just below that single layer of epithelium. So this period of development is so crucial as infants move from a protected environment of the womb, mom's taking care of, she's Department of Security, she's the bouncer, whatever you want to call it. When the baby comes into the world, the immune system has to adapt and be resilient. So infants are particularly susceptible to infection the first few days and few weeks because their immune system is very new. So it's entirely nubile, but as time goes on, if we continue to follow the patterns in nature, then that immune system can actually develop into something quite robust. And this is why you're not giving probiotics to an infant. This is why they say don't give raw honey to an infant, because even though those things are beneficial overall for people, their immune systems are not yet ready to deal with it, so a good intention there would actually result in a very negative outcome. So how do we ensure that the immune system is properly developing and fortifying for itself? Very simple. Follow the path. But not this. We ensure that we have milk, not ensure. That stuff is absolute poison. So breast milk is a very interesting concoction of ingredients. It is the perfect human food, and it has, as I say, a wide spectrum of biologically active factors. So that means it's not just macronutrients, it's not just micronutrients. It's a delivery system to help the gut mature, to influence how the body breaks down and uses energy, and to develop and condition the immune system to be vigilant and on guard for things that are dangerous, but not to hyperreact to everything that comes in, i.e., new foods as they're being introduced and induction of tolerance is happening. So there are a lot of other compounds in breast milk that are proteins that are not necessarily there for growth and development. Things like lactoferrin, that's something you can find in whey protein. It stimulates white blood cells to be more aggressive in breaking down pathogens. Lysosome, immunoglobulins, different things that help the adaptive immune system to become more well educated, to be able to separate friend from foe, food from threat. And this is how nature designed it. If you look here on the left-hand side, you see mostly the content of the macronutrients. We'll talk about why most of the carbohydrates in breast milk are lactose, various healthy fats, because the baby's brain is a very energy-hungry organ, and it is about 60 to 70% fat. But you also get antibodies, micronutrients in the form of vitamins and minerals, those specialized milk fibers called milk oligosaccharides, and hey, you get more bacteria after the fact. Who knew? And as well as other immune cells and hormones, because anabolism is really what the baby's first phase of life is all about. And there are different phases to the lactation, if you will. They say the most important part is the first 4 days, the colostrum, because this is where you're getting the main seeding of things like immunoglobulins. You're getting an incredible amount of immune stimulatory proteins, an incredible amount of essential fatty acids, and a high concentrations of vitamins and minerals, because this is when metabolism switch has been flicked on. It starts to change days 4 to 20. So you start to increase the macronutrient and the lactose content. And if I could ask anyone why lactose, I would ask for a series of bonus points that were absolutely fictitious. So this is when the calories start to build up. So you've gone away from stimulating the immune system. Now you're into feeding and growth of the systemic organism that's the baby. And then days 20 plus, and plus means anything from 6 months up to 2 years. This is where you're getting a lot of hydration, so the water content increases, and the growth and development are still a critical factor, so you're getting a high concentration of both macronutrients and micronutrients. I find that really interesting. And the composition, the protein, carbohydrate, and fat breakdown of breast milk also changes. As you can see, as time goes on, you get more lactose. As time goes on, you get more fat, and you get less protein. So the body is shifting from immune stimulation to an increase of lactose. And if lactose is there, we have to think, well, why would that be there? Lactose is milk sugar. And that might be the preferred source of fuel for lactobacillus, because if you give them what it is they need, they will break down that lactose, they will ferment it, they will create lactic acid, and they will start to increase the pH and fortify the acidity of the child's GI system so it can start to become more hospitable to the different strains and the diversity of bacteria that are rapidly building at this point. We're also increasing the fat content because fat is the preferred source of fuel for a baby. That's why high-fat diets for many people are regenerative from a metabolic perspective, because a high-fat diet is a clean source of energy that doesn't necessitate a ton of insulin release and doesn't yo-yo blood sugar up and down. So these things are fascinating to me because these are not accidents, and we don't necessarily know why these choices were made other than they seem to be the optimal path of development for nourishment for a growing human. So these milk oligosaccharides are these incredibly complex fibers that are not there for the purpose of caloric intake for the baby. Like lactose, they're there for the bacterial growth and development in terms of the profile of the microbes that live within the gut and the microbiome. So the milk oligosaccharides help build and fortify the growing diversity of the microbes, which actually become the most prominent first line defense against potential pathogens and infections for that child, and they stimulate the rapid development of the immune system. The other thing that comes through the breast milk is these antimicrobial components that actually help to directly protect the child from something that may come into their environment via them putting their hand on the dog, putting their hand in the mouth, walking on the ground or crawling all over, and then licking the couch. This is how essentially children educate themselves. So this concert of building microbes and stimulating the immune system and supporting the immune system for mom as long as the baby needs is there for pathogen destruction or deflection, including immune exclusion. We want to make sure that we're not bringing things into the bloodstream that are pro-inflammatory. The second thing we're doing is we're stimulating the interaction with the infant mucosal immune system. If we look at how the small and large intestine develop, we have a single layer of mucus in the small intestine, and we have a bilayer of mucus in the large intestine, and this is where most of the metabolic activity happen. We want to ensure that the specialized cells in the colon, called goblet cells, are always making a thick layer of mucus, because this is the third line of defense of the microbiome as it's developing. It's the physical barrier to entrap stuff via the immune cells, gobbling these potential problems up before they get through the gut lining into the circulatory systems. And the last thing is we want to make sure that we can stimulate epithelial barrier function for the development of healthy intestinal cells, because a child's epithelial barrier turns over very quickly. So if they're experiencing digestive distress, that's an easy path to leaky gut. But if we're stimulating the barrier function to make sure that we're turning over cells that are healthy, then we have this nice crosstalk that really anchors the triangle of microbes, epithelial cells, and the immune cells. And when comparing how breast milk versus formula influences the development of the profile overall, the most important thing that breast milk does, based upon the milk oligosaccharides, the regular bacteria coming in, and the stimulation of the immune system via the antimicrobial proteins, is it allows the bifidobacterium to become the most abundant species that really anchors the colon. The bifido, seemingly in terms of how they interact with the microbiome, seem to be the guys that calm everything down and regulate everything after a potential issue. It's the reason in True Bifido, the one thing we hang our hats on is it's a formula that stimulates only anti-inflammatory cytokines, because bifidobacteria seem to be the ones that calm everything down after some of the other species are able to raise the alarm. So that is something you're going to see that's going to grow differently than if someone is formula fed, because they don't get the same stimulus and development from formula as they do from breast milk. So let's round this out with some key perspectives. And I always want to bring it back to the 30,000-foot view rather than staying stuck in the myopia, because it's really about how you harmonize all of these variables, knowing this knowledge and what it does across the board, rather than hyper-focusing on one thing, like I'm just going to build bifido, I'm not going to think about anything else. Babies specifically, but all humans, are in an incredibly dynamic relationship with our microbiome our entire lives. How we interact with microbes in our early life determines not only how that relationship is established, but the dynamic development of that microbiome and how it helps us influence and underpin our immune system, our metabolic aspects, to some degree our endocrine systems, and obviously our digestive systems, not only in how it functions as a mode of breakdown, but how it's able to absorb nutrition and nourish us. The first 3 years of the child's life are absolutely paramount because this is when this relationship is most established. All of these areas of the body are most influenced during these 3 years. So the gut itself, the immune system, the metabolic system, but things like physiologic resilience, the ability to ward off getting sick, catching common colds and flus are influenced by these things. Things like the gut brain activity and how a child expresses behaviors, emotions, and personality are also influenced by this. And as the research is showing, the mode of delivery, the mode of nourishing, dramatically increases the propensity to being predisposed to pathological degenerative conditions much later in life. So now we have to ask, well, how do we maximize one's opportunity? Because you cannot go back in time, but you can maximize any future forward opportunity. So for those who are fortunate and they were born optimally to a healthy mother, they were well fed, and the third phase of life when we're introducing solid foods, influencing our child's growth and development via lifestyle, the environment, and ultimately the sum of all the exposures that we put into our child's life. For someone who is born under suboptimal conditions, these four factors are even more important in the aftermath of the birth process. Introduction of solid foods is probably the most next important consideration for a variety of reasons. And we have to respect that, first and foremost, different people have different opinions and different strategies. I am not a father or a parent, so I haven't looked very deeply into this process and how the decisions made influence the long-term outcomes of health, but to me, it doesn't make much difference to think of it any other way than how you would optimally feed a human based upon food choices. The only thing you have to account for are things like cultural differences because certain cultures prioritize certain food items over others, and the availability of certain foods based upon geographic location. And the third aspect, and I think this is the best combination, even when someone does start to introduce solids, if the mother is still able to nurse, my bias and my belief is that the body is doing what it wants to do because it knows the child needs that for as long as the mom is going to make food for the baby. The second thing that's important for women to know is the best way to get back into shape after being pregnant is nursing because as a food factory, you tend to use a lot of energy, and whatever excess weight and adipose tissue body fat that's been put on during the pregnancy, that gets broken down and it gets mitochondrially converted to energy that then becomes the energy that makes the food that the mom stores for the baby. So here's my 2 cents in terms of facts, not opinions, based upon considerations for this phase of life when it comes to introductions of solid foods. Most people, before we knew gluten was, evil and various other things when it comes to grains, uh, wheat and various kinds of cereals and small quantities of grains were some of the most commonly introduced foods. I think that certain grains are likely better than others, but the important thing to note is infants do not make a meaningful amount of salivary amylase until they're approximately 6 to 8 months old. For those who have been here listening to us talk about digestion at nauseum for the last few years, the first step of digesting carbohydrates is not possible without salivary amylase. Salivary amylase initiates the initial breakdown of the long chains of bounded glucose called not glycogen, sorry, complex carbohydrates, polysaccharides. That's what initiates the beginnings of breakdown of those things. So if you're giving a child a very complex carbohydrate to digest and they're not making the initial enzymes, that might not be the best choice. And if you go back to looking at the constitution of the macronutrient profile of breast milk, most of the food and its carbohydrate in breast milk was lactose, it was not glucose. So foods higher in healthy fats and moderate in proteins and foods healthy or higher in easier to digest carbohydrates might be a best choice. So breast milk is high in lactose for functional reasons because that lactose is an agent of food and also an environmental influence and stimulant for the digestive system, so it can create the internal pH that optimizes and supports the growth of the microbes that are meant to live there. We're not meant to feed babies high quantities of glucose because that little pancreas isn't necessarily wanting to output tons of pancreatic enzymes and insulin. The third consideration is nutritional density, because during that critical development window, for every calorie you give a baby, a quantity of micronutrient, vitamin, mineral, and what have you, is there and needed to turn those calories into energy or into something that eventually builds structure. The second consideration is environmental exposure, and infants are great at this. They have their own little built-in immune education system. It's basically putting everything that they can put their hands on in their mouth. Licking the dog, grabbing something that they found under the couch that's been there for 6 weeks and they taste it. The touch and eat method is a way of inducing immune tolerance, introducing more environmental stimuli and various microbes from external sources into the child. And in some cases, yes, it may cause a little bit of GI distress or a little bit of illness, but I don't think that's by accident, because when we get sick and we recover from an illness, think of that as the immune system going to the gym. It actually upgrades the immune system's ability to remember a wider array of insults, so the adaptive immune system has antibodies to a variety of different things. So the next time the child gets sick, it's not such a severe thing and recovery is much faster. The other thing they do is they share everyone's germs and illness methods. They will pick up things from other kids and they will pass it on to you, and you will get sick and you will pass it on to the child. Again, more of the same. It's the education of the immune system based upon the environment that you're exposing your child to. The third thing, and I think this is starting to catch a little bit more wind in the latter 5 to 10 years, is we're not becoming so obsessive with overly sanitizing. At least some people aren't. COVID did a number on a lot of people, and I still see people taking hand sanitizers and, various alcohol sprays and spraying absolutely everything. When I go to the gym, it's like if someone walked by it, someone cleans it with a sanitizer. Sanitizers are great for not picking up germs you don't want, but sanitizers overly, they neutralize the diversity of microbes to some degree in wherever they interact with us. If we're inhaling some of the aerosol residues of those sanitizers, we're going to be breathing in an antimicrobial substance. If we chronically use antimicrobial soaps, or we use sanitizers on the skin of our children, if we wipe their faces, if we overly clean them, we're scrubbing off the built-in tolerance that the immune system wants based upon the microbes being resilient and present in optimal numbers to help actually protect the body from certain things. And when it comes to antibiotics, unless it's absolutely necessary, there's nothing more detrimental to a developing microbiome than giving someone a course of antibiotics in early life, especially a strong antibiotic, because even in a fully functioning adult, moderately strong antibiotics likely cause between 3 and 9 months of change to the microbiome before it recovers. And even when it does recover, I'm not so sure that it ever recovers to a pre-antibiotic stage. The next consideration are pre and postpartum considerations for mom. For anyone who's wanting to have a child, having a kid is the most simplistic task in terms of something we don't have to think about doing because the body's designed to do it. But very few people think about, I'm going to get myself in shape and healthy in order to be ready and strong enough to give myself the chance at a healthy pregnancy and to give my child the best possible start. So the health of mom's microbiome, the sum total of all microbiomes, is going to be what you give to the baby. The sum total health of the mitochondria, and in one egg, you have hundreds of thousands of mitochondria that eventually seed the differentiated cells of all the different body systems. That is what the baby is going to use to make energy. So making sure that you take the time to prepare your body for pregnancy, to make your vessel the most hospitable one possible, is going to give the child the greatest opportunity. And then, as I said before, after the child's born, making sure that you're nursing and allowing the intelligence of the body to bring you back to baseline. And an interesting fact is that in most traditional cultures, they didn't allow the woman to have another child for at least 2 years post-delivery, because the belief was it took a full 2 years for that body to fully recover. So again, if the body's not healthy and strong, the next child that comes too early is not going to have the same opportunities for quality genetic material that the prior one was, because whatever the baby needs, it will pull from mom. So making sure mom is maximizing her opportunity to support and nourish herself is also going to be good for her recovery because the baby will pull what it needs from you. And if that is what creates mom brain that people talk about, well, with a little bit of preconceived notions, education, and commitments, you have the ability to offset that to some degree. Now we have to ask, where do supplements come in? So we're going to talk about supplemental considerations. Haha, get it? When it comes to infants, infants and supplements are not a thing because of all the reasons that I mentioned. The body is focusing on allowing nature to take its course, and once the baby gets to the point of being a toddler, so likely around the age of 3, you have that finalized human microbiome. You have the functional structure of an adult profile of gut bacteria and an adult-like structure of how the GI system is formed. This is where probiotics and various other supplements can come in. And the thing that we hear so much success about in terms of dealing with children from all walks of life, healthy kids who want to be proactive and prevent any potential issues that can happen during cold and flu season. Everyone at school or daycare is sick. Sprinkling a little granular Theralac on porridge, on yogurt, on applesauce, whatever, is going to help, again, anchor and stimulate the best possible state of that child's unique innate microbiome, which, as we know, the microbes can be the secret weapon in helping to either crowd out or ward off potential pathogens, infections, and viruses. The other side of the coin that we see are when we're dealing with children with severe issues and conditions, talking everything from childhood diabetes to severe expressions of not degeneration, but neurocompromise, autism. Theralac has had a great track record and has a great history, and Jeff Thurston can probably add his 5 cents after this because he's there at all the conferences talking to all the doctors and also lecturing to a lot of people. So he gets in-field feedback. But we've had incredible success with this multi-strain probiotic because it has all the strain designated strains that we know based upon how they function, the kind of influence they have over the immune system and the microbiome. And even though they're not encapsulated, they still have all the benefits that regular Theralac does, the sodium alginate, the lactose stim, so we can ensure their delivery. We can ensure that they have nourishment so that when they wake up, they can actually survive and thrive. But it allows the issue that most kids are unable to swallow capsules to be bypassed. And this can be used in a multitude of ways. It can be used daily at a low dose for just general health and wellness. It can be used post-course of antibiotics in a higher concentration, especially if the child is showing negative symptoms from the antibiotic-induced bacterial die-off. And it also can be used as a pulse during, the times of year where getting sick and illnesses are more likely and more prevalent, to make sure that whatever your child shares with their friends at school, they don't bring home to you, and you don't have to call in sick a couple days, unless, of course, you need a couple days in bed watching Netflix. That's totally your prerogative. And there's considerations for mom. From what I hear, this is entirely through the grapevine, pregnancy sometimes isn't fun. Don't know from experience, but I've had plenty of friends who've had kids, and I've heard some pretty funny stories of craving things like pickle juice and all kinds of weird scenarios to being turned off by the smell of something they used to love. Fundamentally, growing a human inside of you changes your immune system, it changes your microbiome, and it changes how your physiology functions as a whole. So the three considerations for moms, because we've also become highly fearful of supplementing during pregnancy, I think the best strategy is make sure that you do what it is you need to do to anchor the digestive system in terms of support. What I mean by that is the function of your digestive system, so you're maximizing the breakdown of food and nourishing yourself as optimally as possible because you're passing that on to the baby, but also the digestive system as an environment. You're using certain kinds of fibers and probiotics to help the microbiome ensure that it remains strong. And if there is any kind of scenario or situation that comes up where the microbiome is compromised, using a bifidobacterial-based probiotic or a lactobacillus and bifidobacterium combination is going to help regenerate to the degree that you can that healthy profile, because that's what's going to influence the vaginal canal that the child's going to come through. The last part are constipation issues. But imagine as something grows inside of you, it pushes on internal organs, making things move less efficiently and less fluidly. And passing dry, hard stool while being pregnant has to be a horrible thing. So making sure that you're removing the toxic material and moving your bowels on a regular basis, the prior to considerations have a massive influence in constipation. But ensuring that your food choices and your status of hydration and your activity levels and the quality of your sleep are there in order for you to maximize your health so that your pregnancy story isn't one of the hellacious tales that people sometimes tell others, although it could be a badge of honor. And my heart goes out to women who have to have really challenging pregnancies. But remember, everything that you go through, the baby has to experience. So if you can make that as optimal as possible, it's a wonderful union for both of you to go through. So I want to thank everyone for being here today. I hope this was interesting. I really love the ability to tell the story of the infinite wisdom in the design of nature. And I'm sure most here who are watching and those who will listen to it after the fact know a lot of this stuff, but it's good to remind yourself of the process, not only from a structure and function and a functional perspective, but understanding that there's an inherent design in nature that doesn't just lend itself to using that wisdom to the process of conception, pregnancy, and birth, but all aspects of health follow that plan of nature. And our bodies have a wisdom that, in and of itself, uh, has the ability to self heal. And I think some of the best practitioners learn these patterns and use supplements and strategies and diet modifications and lifestyle implementations to allow the body to be put in the best state for self healing.